Hey all. So I decided, because a lot of my recap videos have been very, very long, um, that I'm gonna try to break it up. I'm not necessarily gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna do it every week or, um, you know, so many times a month, but I think in months where I'm reading a lot and I feel like there's gonna be a ton of stuff, I want to try to break it up at least in some reasonable fashion. So, um, and I'm doing a couple readathons throughout the year, and I may try to track one down every month. I do find they keep me like focused, but a lot of that's going to just depend on how busy work starts getting, and it's a busy time of year. So, I've been able to read a lot this month already, but I don't know if I'll be able to keep that up, consistently moving forward. So, but for right now, I've already read several books, for the year, and I have so many challenges that I'm doing. So I wanted to kind of go through some of the books I've read. There were a few that were December reads after I did my December recap, because I had filmed it kind of towards the end of the month, and then there was stuff that I read in the last few days of December, and some stuff I've read so far this month. So we're going to do this as like my first recap. There may only be 2 for the month, there may be 3, it'll all kind of just depend on how much I read for the rest of the month. But here we are, like, not even at the halfway point, and I've read a lot. So if that keeps up, I may do 2, like I said, I may do 2 more, or I might just do 1 more, but I wanted to break it up so it wasn't, an hour long. All right, so let's just go through them. So the first thing I read, which was a December late read, is The Funhouse by Dean Koontz. I don't have much to say about this. I mean, it is what it is. It's old Dean Koontz. It's not even like really old Dean Koontz, because it was a novelization of a movie that ended up getting delayed so that the book came out first. But it's like nonsense, honestly. It was just total nonsense. It wasn't even like good nonsense, which again, I mean, it's a novelization of a screenplay, so that could be part of it. And, I guess it's fairly traditional, like 80s old school sort of horror stuff. But I don't know. It just wasn't. I don't know if it was just not in the mood. It was just kind of nonsense for me. So the next one was, I read an arc of Suffrage Song, The Haunted History of Gender, Race, and Voting Rights in the U.S. And this is a sort of comic book, graphic novel history of women's suffrage. And what I really liked about this is, I mean, I wouldn't say it like taught me anything necessarily new, but it did kind of, I mean, it was an educational. I always think anything that's like an educational work with a graphic novel format is always nice, because it gives more exposure to people who don't like to like read necessarily, who it's easier for them to have the visuals. But one of the things I did like is that the author did a really good job of kind of dealing with some of the more complex issues that have to do with, women's suffrage and the early days of like women's rights and women's activism, because, unfortunately at the time, women's suffrage was something that was like kind of being, as a conversation that was happening during like abolition as well. And so like you had a lot of people who obviously were kind of both, they were abolitionists, and they were like pro women's rights, and really like pro racial equality and everything. And then you had people that were like, I don't understand. I mean, to be honest, I struggle kind of to understand how you can be like pro racial equality but not pro gender equality, or you could be pro gender equality and not racial equality. I mean, it's like, it's kind of, to me, it's odd. I've always found it odd when someone can be like very like active in rights for one group and then not for like other groups, because it's sort of like, how are you like, are you not realizing the contradictions here? But I mean, obviously that's from a modern sensibility. And so what I think is nice is kind of addressing that, is that we don't live in the turn of the century. We're not living in like the, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And so it's very hard, like, to really put ourselves and look at people from history and kind of, obviously under today's lens, you're kind of like, oh, they're flawed in this way and this way. And I don't know if I would make those decisions. And it seems like, they were a good person in some ways, but they were also immoral in others. And I mean, this is a common, like, topic, I think, even with, like, when you're reading a book and you're like, okay, that author was kind of a scummy person. And, like, I have an easier time, like, I'll just be honest, I have an easier time reading Lovecraft than I do, like, I've decided I'm not going to read Dan Simmons' Hyperion. That was one of my goals for the year, but I've only after I planned that, I discovered that apparently he's, like, super homophobic and kind of a racist and a misogynist, and I was like, well, I'm not here for that. And the thing is, he's still alive, so, like, if you're that way now, like, it's easier for me to go, nah, I'm good, but it's hard for me to kind of look at somebody in the 30s and try to judge them by, like, today's standards. So I mean, and again, everyone has their level of what their comfort and how they can, like, excuse certain things. I just think, like, if 100 years has passed, it's hard to look at us. And so I thought the author in this did a good job of kind of being like, yes, some of these women did some really amazing things. And, like, we would not be here having these conversations, especially women readers or women writers. A lot of us would just not be here without these women. We would not have any of the things we have. However, for some of these women, the sacrifice to get women's rights was to give up, like to trade essentially, like, with, men who wanted sort of things that were immoral. Like, but basically, some of the women's suffrage leaders essentially started keeping their mouth shut about, racial equality, because it was like, well, if you just stop talking about that, we can focus on, we'll help you with the women's stuff. And then there were, like, some religious elements, and so some of those things, to me, it's a very difficult conversation, but I thought this book did a good job of kind of addressing that, of being like, okay, so yeah, some of these women did a lot of great things, but also, like, they did a lot of great things for white women, and they weren't necessarily as open-minded about, women of color or indigenous women, and or, some of the things they did were good, but then they also could be kind of like, they had some internalized misogyny still, that, maybe they didn't push far enough. And again, like, but it's a nuanced conversation that is very hard to kind of write off and be like, well, Susan B. Anthony sucks because she did this one thing. Well, okay, but she also did these other things, and so, and again, this is, I think, just a general question and a general discussion that needs to be had about history. And again, one of the things that is concerning is, like, a lot of this push to kind of clean up our history and not teach topics that are, like, complex, but it is complex. I mean, like, and we need to talk about the fact that, yeah, there were some really great things that the founding fathers did, but also a lot of them were slave owners, and, that needs to be part of the conversation. But anyway, so I just thought it handled that very well, so I appreciated that. So again, that was a December late read. Speaking of, kind of nonfiction and topics, about our history, is the next thing I read at the end of December was Killers of the Flower Moon. And, one of the things that really disturbed me about this is that I knew about it from the movie, and that was it. And that's the only thing I know about, essentially what was, I mean, I don't know that you can call it less than a genocide. I mean, they basically, a lot of people murdered a bunch of Native Americans and just said, hey, we're going to like wipe out this entire community because they have money and we want it. And there's really not anything else to it than that. Is a lot of white people wanted the money that the Osage Nation had, and they worked together to essentially get this as much as they could and get power and money by murdering people. And it's appalling. It's a ridiculous moment in our history, and it's absolutely disturbing that it ever happened. But I also think it's really disturbing that it's not something we talk about. And I mean, I think, the author does a good job of explaining why. Like, I mean, I didn't learn about it in school, but, he didn't even publish his book until I was out of high school. So, I mean, clearly we were a little bit in a different time. People weren't necessarily talking about some of these things. But I really, I know there's a lot of pushback about teaching some of these things. But the first time I heard about Tulsa, I think it was Tulsa, right? The race massacre was from Watchmen. And the first time I heard about partition over in, Pakistan and India was through Doctor Who. And, the first time I heard about the Osage murders was by the preview, because Martin Scorsese was making a movie. And while I'm glad that, media is like, pop culture is basically incorporating these key moments in our history, it also is kind of appalling to be, an adult and be like, I didn't even know this happened in my own country. And so, but meanwhile, I've heard about the Salem witch trials like 150,000 times. Now, to be fair, I am from Massachusetts, so, I mean, that's part of it, too. And again, I am not saying that we should not teach the Salem witch trials. That's a whole other thing. That needs to be part of the conversation as well. But it is concerning, because I feel like we get to a point in history where, like, I mean, I know, like, I remember having conversations with, like, my classmates about how, like, the Japanese internment camps, the entire conversation in our AP history class was basically, also we put some Japanese people in camps. Okay, moving on. And that was it. And we, like, didn't talk about it. And if you ask about it, you were, like, encouraged, because we, as part of AP history, we had multiple projects where we'd have to, like, take something we were covering, like, briefly in school and do, like, more research on it. But I mean, shouldn't be on, like, a 16-year-old to decide that the Japanese internment camps were something that, like, they want to know more about. Everybody should know that happened, and that was part of our history. And, we have a tendency to kind of be like, oh, these things make people uncomfortable. Well, you know what? It needs to make us uncomfortable. Our history, there's a lot of horrible things we did. And like I said in the last section, I mean, that doesn't mean you can't, I mean, obviously with the Osage murders, there's not, like, good people doing, but again, like, J. Edgar Hoover is a good example, because, like, he supported the investigation, which is the only reason anyone even knew this was happening at the time, that anybody was even, like, aware of this, like, that essentially stopped the murders. But, J. Edgar Hoover was not a great person either. So, I think it's important. And especially as you get into, like, middle school and high school. I mean, adolescents can handle learning their history, and they can handle, the fact that these are difficult conversations, and that people are not all good or bad. Like, I think that's an important thing, is that good people can have done bad things in their lives, and bad people can have done good things in their lives. And, our history is not clean and perfect, and it's something that we do need to learn. And I'm just concerned about, like, the fact that we don't learn this stuff, and it feels like there's more and more pushback to even eliminate more stuff from the history that we do learn. I mean, I definitely learned about slavery, and now people don't even want to talk about that. And it's like, okay, but it was a key part of our history, and we can't talk about anything without addressing, some of the things that we did to get to where we are. So I don't know. It's, it's a challenge, but whenever I read like nonfiction, I find myself like, I do love reading nonfiction, but I often end up like, it also takes me forever because every little piece I want to like Google and learn more about. And then I'm like on like page 7 and I've spent like 6 hours just like on these like internet Google search rabbit holes. But I mean, I think it would be nice if like there was some foundation for a lot of these things. So when you go and you read nonfiction, you're like, oh yes, I'm aware of the basic like foundation of this concept, and as opposed to I've never even heard of this, and that's kind of frustrating. Excellent book, by the way. Killers of the Flower Moon. Really, really, really enjoyed this. Well, again, I say enjoy in a lot of my videos, and enjoy doesn't necessarily mean I was like happy to read it. I mean, it's awful, but I thought it was a really good read. So the next one, I started my, where Sir Chonk and I did like our 12 books for each other. I started my, my side, to read his books. I finished Killers of the Flower Moon right before the new year, and I wanted to read something quick, going into January so that I could finish it before the new year. And so I read Dungeon of Dread, which is one of the books he had put on my challenge list. And this is a choose your own adventure, endless quest, like D&D game book. And so, and it was fine. Like, it was pretty much what I anticipated. I've read a lot of choose your own adventure in my life. So, I mean, it wasn't like better or worse than any other choose your own adventure. But I did... I think I read it 6 times, like, to get, because I didn't die at any point, so that's good, but I, like, kept, like, getting out of the dungeon, like, safely, but without winning and without defeating the evil wizard. So I read it until I defeated the evil wizard, and now I have all the treasure. So yeah, I have all the treasure that is apparently fictional, so it's very sad because I won and I won nothing. but yeah, so I read that, and so that was a late December read. And then also the last thing I read at the end of the year, I had like an hour and a half left of the new year, and I was like, I'm going to read something. So I read A Sincere Warning About the Entity in Your Home, because I've been trying to clean off like my Kindle and stuff. This is just a short story, but just a spooky kind of ghost story. It's really, really like gross. There's like a lot of like body medical elements that are just really messed up. But I mean, it was a fun, short, creepy read. All right, so moving into January. So the first book I read in January was a reread, and this is a Bunnicula, and this is on my favorite books of all time. And Sir Chonk had read the Bunnicula, the first few books last year, and I feel like he like talked them up to me in a way that I was like disappointed in my own favorite book, one of my favorite books. But it's like I haven't read it since like 5th grade, and so I was like, oh, and he was like, oh, it's so much smarter than I thought it would be, and I read it, and I was like, yeah, it's pretty much what I remember. And again, it's a kid's book, and so, but I think he was just surprised, like how funny it was and how entertaining it was, for a book that's for 3rd graders. And again, when I reread it, I was like, okay, yeah, but it's still a book for 3rd graders. So, I mean, it's a simple, easy read. But so this actually checked off several prompts for me. So, for the tbrathon, which is something being done by Leandra, the TBR Zero, one of the books is either more than 2 people on the cover or animals on the cover. So this is animals on the cover. And then I'm also doing the Read Your Bookshelf year-long challenge. And one of the first ones is for January was either read a book with a dog or a cat on the cover. And this has both. So I have, what that means is that basically I haven't picked a path yet, because it will just kind of depend on what I end up doing with the February prompts, which is either a book under 250 pages, I believe, or over 400. So it'll just depend on what I end up doing. And then this is also my first towards the Bookish Drummers Discord challenge for 52 books. and it was reread a book that you loved as a child. That was like one of your, formative years of reading. So, so that was Bunnicula. So it's still a 5-star. It's still Bunnicula. So the second book I read was London Seance Society, and I had read Lost Apothecary last year by the same author, and I really enjoyed that. And I would say that was like a solid, like, it was almost a 5-star. It's just, I like dual timelines, but I think sometimes I was like, whenever I'd go back to like the modern times, I was kind of like, oh, go back. I like the past. So what I liked about this is I thought it was better just because it stuck to the past tense. And I liked that it was like a look into like spiritualism in the 19th century. Yeah. And, because this was like obviously a popular thing in London and in Europe at the time. And I enjoyed that it kind of was like, it was something I don't know a lot about. And I mean, historical fiction, so that was kind of fun. And so that was what I read it for the tbrathon. It was historical fiction. And then I used it for my first prompt for the 52 book club, which is a book with no people on the cover. And then in the Bookish Drummer challenge, it's a book connected to something I read in 2023, because I had read Lost Apothecary in 2023. So like I said, I liked this better than Lost Apothecary, and I enjoyed it. There were a couple elements I didn't necessarily like, but overall I thought it was good. It deals with essentially this woman who's a medium, and she's like renowned throughout Europe, and this girl whose sister's been killed, and her sister really admired this medium, and so this girl is currently training under the medium to become a medium, even though she thinks a lot of it's nonsense. And then they get a request to essentially come to London to do an investigation because the president of the London Seance Society has been murdered. And this particular medium, what she does is she communicates with people who died from murder, who are victims of murders, and finds out who their killers were. So, obviously a little supernatural element, but minimal. It really does kind of look at some of the like science of the time and some of the ways people manipulated the phase and the sort of like hype and enthusiasm for spiritualism to make money and to profit and to like gain power. And so it had some really interesting historical elements as well, and there's a little bit of a romance. I could have completely done without the romance, but it wasn't like over the top, and there wasn't too much of it. There were like periods that like got fairly sexual. It wasn't like super graphic or anything like that, but it was kind of it felt a little out of place. But for the most part, it didn't bother me. And then I DNF'd a book, and this was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I just couldn't do it. Like, the characters were just so phony to me. Like, their dialogue just felt completely inauthentic. I just felt like the author was trying way too hard to make them quirky and fun, and they just didn't sound like actual humans. And like, it's one of the problems I have with like John Green's writing. I really don't like John Green. I love Paper Towns. It's one of my favorite books of all time, but other than that, I haven't really enjoyed his books because I just don't feel like they're authentic. I feel like they are trying too hard to kind of have this like character who's so unique and fun and just cutesy and quirky, and I'm just like, nah, like, people don't talk like this or act like this. And so this was, so I get there's a bonus if you DNF a book for the Bookish Drummer Challenge. So I get bonus points for not finishing this book. All right, so then I had done, and I did a little bit of a review of Lolita, but this has been on my to read since I was in high school. And I finally got around to it, and I mean, I'm not saying anything new, but it was fantastic. Definitely worth the hype. And one of the things that the book sets out to do, and the author had set out to do, was to make the argument that you can write a beautiful book or create beautiful art even with vile subject matter. And I think it's and obviously this was like a philosophical kind of question, especially like in this era, is could you make vulgarity beautiful? And yes, you can, clearly, because it's incredibly well written. And one of the things he does as well is uses language to sort of manipulate the reader, because the character is, really good with language. And so what the character is doing is manipulating you into liking him and siding with him and sympathizing with him, even though he's a pedophile. And like, I get why people are like, I can't believe this, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And like, he's appalling. Like, if you like him, I mean, he's, as a narrator, he's engaging, yes, and he's funny, but he's likable in the way that, like, he's fun to read, but like, there's zero redemption for him. He's an awful human being. And I think it also kind of goes into that, can you separate the art and artist question? And like I said earlier, is like, I can kind of do that with, like, I can do that with, like, older artists, like, who aren't in today's, who aren't still alive. But I have a harder time. I mean, I love Harry Potter, but I'm probably not going to make a point of reading anything else J.K. Rowling does, as an example. So, but like I said, I can go back and read things, that are classics, even if the person necessarily wasn't likable. But this book was just really stunningly written. And I mean, obviously, no, you don't get Lolita's perspective, and he's abusive and it's awful, and you should try to get her perspective, but that's not the book he's writing. And, I loved My Dark Vanessa. That was one of my favorite books last year. And so I think if you want, like, the victim perspective, I mean, you can read that, but, this isn't about that. That wasn't the goal. That wasn't the point of the book. And so, yes, the topic is complex and it's difficult. I will say, though, that there's no, like, it's not graphic at all. There's no detail given about, their relationship, if you can call it a relationship, about whatever, what he's doing to her. There's, like, a couple, like, just small side comments where you realize, like, she's not really into it, that it is abuse. But they're kind of side comments, and it's not, the focus isn't on the sexual side of this. There's very little even dealing with the sexuality piece. And most of the sexual stuff is earlier on, when he's talking about, like, his first sexual experience. So that has nothing to do with Lolita. So this is on my tbrathon, because it was a book on my top shelf. The 52 Book Club, it was a book that starts with L. I read it as one of the 24 banned books of 2024 I'm going to do, and it's also a TBR veteran for the Bookish Drummer Challenge. So the next one I read was Take a Bow, Noah Mitchell, and this is just a really cute gay romance. I should have loved this, and I liked it a lot, and, like, I would say it was, like, solid, but I wanted to love this book. I mean, it's about two guys, like, teenagers who meet, like, through a video game, like an online game, and they kind of build a relationship and a friendship there. And then so our main character ends up, like, falling for the guy, but he can't meet him in real life for a series of reasons. And then he realizes he's in this, like, local musical theater production, so he joins through a series of events. And so there's video games, there's, like, what I've come to realize is when it comes to romance, I think I like YA romance. It's cuter, it's sweeter. I feel like everybody can relate to like that early love, first love kind of thing a lot more than I can relate to like, relationships. Not that I don't, I'm married and everything, but like I think a lot of books that deal with romance in like later years they just don't work for me the same way. Probably because like the experiences can be so dramatically different. And also there's just a real like need to like have like detailed sexual stuff, and I don't need that. Like I don't want it. And again, this one definitely, it doesn't shy away from the sexual side of like the relationship. It's actually fairly like open conversation about sexuality. But I do think even then it's kind of more about like the awkwardness of it, and it's not graphic, and like I just don't like the smut stuff, and it's like really heavy in like a lot of adult romance now. And so I think what I found is even when it is adult romance, I like queer romance more. And I mean, unfortunately, I think part of the reason is just because like it's harder to publish a book with too much smut if it's LGBTQ like relationships versus typical like I won't say typical, that's the wrong word, but like your traditional, I guess, like tropey heterosexual romance where it's like, oh yeah, okay, we can just show lots and lots of graphic stuff there, but people get like a little weirded out, I guess. I mean, obviously not everyone gets weirded out, but I think it's harder, publishers deal with more backlash. And so I think a lot of like the queer romances stay cleaner if for no other reason than they want to get their books published, and so they kind of have to, unfortunately. And again, I think that's a social issue, but for me, it's better because I don't have to read too much like graphic smut, and I don't like it. So, so this one, the one thing I didn't like is I did think like that it had that kind of like typical rom-com issue where like most of the problems in this book could have easily been resolved if people just like didn't overreact to every slight little thing and like just communicated. And that kind of annoys me, but for the most part, I still really enjoyed it because, I mean, musical theater, video games, and cute YA queer romance was pretty much like everything I wanted. And so this is a happy book for the TBR-a-thon. It was a book for the 52 book club. I actually hadn't read the blurb. Somebody recommended it to me. They said, oh, you might like this. This is like a romance. And I just saw that there was like video game and something that had to do with theater. So I like the cover basically was like, oh, this is probably cute. And then for the bookish drummer, for song vibes, because obviously Take a Bow is a song by Rihanna, and I like that song. So, yeah, so that's where that one goes. And then I finally read Piranesi, however you want to say it. And I loved it. And what's weird is I really loved the first half, and that's where a lot of people I've seen in reviews or in a lot of people like have like kind of given up on it, because they're like, all this guy is doing is like just diary entries about all the different like statues he's looking at. But honestly, I could have read a whole book of just this guy walking around this like hall. The way he described it, his voice, it was just really compelling and interesting to me. And I had like a theory of like what was going on in this book. It's called a mystery. It's not really a mystery. It's more just that like it's mysterious what's going on. And I had a theory that didn't pan out, and I wasn't super into like where I could tell about like 30% of the way into the book where it was going. And it went there, and that was, it wasn't like a surprise. There was no twist or anything. But so I was kind of like back and forth because I really like I said, I really loved the first part of the book where he was just kind of walking around. And then I was like starting to be like, I don't know about this. I don't like this direction. And then some things happened in the last like, I don't even know, 20 pages maybe. And I started to like not read the book literally. Like I was like, okay, so maybe this isn't meant to be literal. And maybe it's like a metaphor for something else. And when I look at it that way, I really love the whole book. I might be misreading it. I might be overthinking it. It might just be what it is. But for me, it was more impactful as a metaphor. And so I liked that, and that made me like love the book, and so I gave it a 5-star, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, like I said. But I kind of saw this whole story as like a metaphor for trauma, and I think there's a lot you could kind of like look at there, and I really enjoyed that. So this was on my TBR-a-thon for being on the TBR forever. 52 book club, a book everyone or author everyone except you has read, because I feel like I'm the only person, like everyone and their like third cousin and step uncle has read this book. And then for the Bookish Drummer, it was the author has the same initial as your last name or your name. So all right, and then I read Night of the Storm, which was an arc. This comes out the 16th, and it didn't end up working for me. I really wanted to like this. Locked Room Mystery Storm, it was during like Hurricane Harvey, so I enjoyed the concept. Like I was like, oh, people trapped in a house during a storm and people are being murdered, and one of the things I also liked is that it was like the whole family was Indian. I'm pretty sure it's Indian. Maybe I'm wrong. But like I liked like the diversity there, but I thought like this was it's hard to pull off. Like I love Daisy Darker, which is an example of a book that is about 50% mystery and 50% sort of like family dynamics and like relationship drama. And I don't mean romantic relationship, but like family drama. This one I would say was like 80 to 90% family drama with like probably like 80 with like 20% of mystery, and there's just too much. It was too much on the family drama and not enough of the murder mystery. So I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. And then I read Everyone Here Is Lying by Shia LaPena, and I knew going in that I knew like Honest Book Reviewer didn't like it, but then I think Bookish Drummer did like it. So I was like, okay, well, I like Shia LaPena, and I've enjoyed a lot of her books. And so even if they're not like great, I've enjoyed them enough to like, I think a lot of them I gave 5 stars because they were just fun. And so I was like, even if it's like implausible and silly, it's probably going to be entertaining. And I will say this, it was super compelling. I asked for it for Christmas, and I was like, I wanted to get to it quickly. So I read it. I was super into it. Like, I couldn't put it down. And I was engaged in it. And even though I hated every single character with like a fiery passion, because they're so unlikable, but they're not unlikable in a fun way. They're just awful people. I still was like, okay, so we're showing how like the picture perfect small town, picture perfect families really aren't. And there's this like hidden dark side there. And okay, it's been done a million times, but okay, I can just get behind it, and I'll just tolerate how unlikable these people are because it's fast-paced and, there's a mystery here. But the mystery, like, not only was implausible, it's actually extremely, like, off-putting. Like, I don't want to say, like, I just think that a lot of what is done in this book is, like, actually very damaging to people with mental health issues, to people, especially children. And because basically it's about this family and this girl, their 9-year-old daughter is missing, and she has like oppositional defiance or ADHD, or I don't even know. They don't really say. She's just difficult. But one of the things I found about this book is that like the characters are horrible. They care way more about their like family drama and not family drama, like personal drama, like who's having an affair and who said what about whom, and it's like a soap opera. But like meanwhile, this like 9-year-old's missing, who for the record is clearly not 9, and I don't know if the author's ever met a 9-year-old, but like nothing about this character is 9. But I was like, whatever, I'll just gonna, in my mind, I'll just like swap them out for like 12 or something. But even then, like, honestly, just, there were a lot of, like, implausible things just all throughout the book. Like, for instance, like, she's missing because she was sent home alone from school which no school would do with a 9-year-old. And then, there was this thing where, there was an anonymous tip that possibly, was the lead suspect, and the cops were like, but it's anonymous, so can we get a search warrant, and, can we validate it if the person will come forward, and the lawyer's like, we don't have a real witness, and I don't know, that might be all true for, from a legal perspective, but the missing child is 9, and I'm like, all of this would have been solved by just calling, child services, because child services does not need, a witness to come forward or whatever. They're not going to tell you. They're just going to show up and investigate. And so I'm like, why is child services not involved? Because all of these things that were going on would have been, pretty quickly, I wouldn't say quickly resolved, because child services is, way understaffed. But, it just didn't work, all of that. And then at the end, I was just so, I don't get offended. Nothing offends me unless it's, just a lack of research and a really bad representation of a group. And in particular, this is, so damaging to children with, behavioral issues and, special ed students. And there's a clear, lack of research that was done, which is very concerning because, and I don't want to spoil it, but basically, there's talk about, psychopathy, psychopathology. Someone's called a psychopath, which, I know people use that word, but, it kind of comes across like they're, this is, a legit answer. And there's no such thing as, a psychopath diagnosis. A lot of times what people are thinking of when they think, psychopathology or, in traditionally, psychopathology just means, it's pathology. So of your, psychiatric, whatever. So it just means, mental illness. And, but, I think a lot of times what people are thinking of is, sociopathology or, antisocial personality disorder. But, those things are not diagnosed until a certain point for a reason, because you can't really diagnose children and, adolescents with these things just because, the brain is developing. There's, but I just felt like this took all the work that people have done to, bring, awareness of, mental illness, behavioral problems, with young kids, special education, and it just basically took, years of it and threw it out the window for, a gotcha plot to, make, people who like domestic thrillers happy. And I just don't like mental illness and, people with, trauma and, issues. I don't like an abuse and stuff like that. I don't like that as, a plot point. And I don't mean, I can read, I read, like I said, My Dark Vanessa was one of my favorite books last year. And that is, the plot is about trauma. But that's okay. I love Lovely Bones. And obviously rape and murder is a plot point. I don't mind when it's a plot point. I don't like when, thrillers use, not only mental health, but, stigmatization of mental health or, bad representation of mental illness as, a reason for people to, commit a crime or as, the twist. And I don't want to, give anything else I say is just going to be too spoilery. But, yeah, I was extremely disappointed. And to the point where, I don't think I'm going to... I have a couple of her other books, so I'll probably read the ones I have. But I don't know if I'm going to buy anything else because I was just, really just kind of appalled that, no one bothered to do any research. And it was just really upsetting. But anyway, it counted for the tbrathon as hometown vibes because it's set in a small town. A revenge story for the 52 book club. And it was a book gifted to me for the Bookish Drummer Challenge. So then there's 2 more. All right, so the next one I absolutely loved, and I mentioned on Goodreads, so I had set up this system on Goodreads because I know how people can get about the numbers So the only books that I will give a star rating on Goodreads is anything I can solidly recommend, and I give it a 5. For me, a lot of times those books could be like, at a personal level, maybe more of a 4. But I feel like I can solidly recommend them, so I give them 5s. And then books come along, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could give like bonus points for certain books. Because basically what I do is I shelve a book that's like anything that would be like a DNF through like a 2-star is like DNF or not for me. Anything that would be like over a 2, so like even a 2.5 to like essentially like a 3.5 as kind of ambivalent, and then anything essentially between like a 3.75 and up through basically a 5 is really enjoyed, if not 5 stars. And so a lot of times that's like, it's something I just feel like there's something that's holding me back from feeling comfortable recommending it to anyone. But then a book comes along and is like 100% like one of the best books I've read. And that is everyone, for me, for this month so far, it's Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. And I had gotten the arc of the second book, but I didn't know it was the second book. So I read this so I can read the arc fairly soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. But this book was so good. Like, it was so clever, so brilliant. Like, the writing is, it's very fourth wall breaking, and there's a lot of like sort of snarky narration. But it's not condescending or insulting. It's very like, it's more like tongue-in-cheek, like, hey reader, bear with me, some of these are tropey things, but like, this is what happened in this mystery, and like, because it's being told like as if it's a true story, and it's so fun because like the narrator, it's more like of a partnership than like someone like, and a lot of people compared West Heart Killer, which, as you know, I really did not like and was very frustrated with, because that's meta and it has some fourth wall breaking. And I think that's a very, very bad comparison, because in that one, I did feel like it was condescending, and it was like, look how smart I am. Aren't I smarter than you silly reader? Whereas like this one felt more like, hey, I know we've all read these mysteries, but bear with me. Like sometimes tropes happen, it just really was like fun. And it felt like someone was more like, I don't know, this character respects the reader, or the writer does, and the character. But this is a traditional locked room mystery. I mean, it's not locked room just because of the fact that it's not like literally in one room, although actually one of the murders is in a locked room. Well, yeah, anyway. And so basically it's about, the primary story here is that there's a family reunion up in the mountains. There's a storm. This is in Australia. And, so people are kind of trapped. And there's some murders. And, but what's really great is it's like, essentially like the author sets up early on, the rules of a mystery, like to make a good mystery. And what's great is he like narrator references these throughout, and they are really like important, because a lot of the things that like, the one thing I don't agree with is it's like something about like, you can't have like the whodunit, the killer can't have a point of view. And I think sometimes you can have the killer have the point of view, which is fine. But I mean, it is tough, because if the detective has the point of view and that's the killer, you're kind of like, but I thought the rules for the most part were nice, because like then the narrator would reference them and be like, no, this person's not the killer. We're only 56%. If you look at your percentage read, you'll see we're only 6% of the way into the book. So this obviously isn't the killer. And it's just like that kind of funny stuff. Like, because you're like, yeah, because that's exactly what I'm doing, is I'm like, could they really solve it in like this early in the book? But I will say, from a mystery perspective, what I really liked about this, I called it around, I think like 63% on Goodreads. I'm pretty sure I know who did it, so I'm curious to see if I'm right. And I was right. But I didn't feel like, oh, it was easy to figure out. I was just like, I thought the way it was done, there were enough clues given that you could figure it out. but also they were subtle enough that I could see like getting to the end and being like, how did I miss that? So I just thought it was so well plotted, well crafted, just exceptionally well written. And it was like, I was like, kind of like, it's like the thinking person's like clever mystery. And it was intelligent, and it treats the reader as intelligent. And I could definitely see this book making it onto my top for the year. I mean, obviously it's pretty early in the year, so it's hard to really say. But this is probably one of the best things I've read in a while. So loved it, absolutely loved it, and can't say enough good things about it. And then the last book I read was First Lie Wins, and I had the arc of this, and then everyone was raving about it. It's like a Reese Witherspoon book club book. It was like a book of the month pick. And so I was like, and like literally it's like all 5-star reviews. And so I was like, I got to read this. I'm excited to read it. And oh God, I don't know. I've decided that sometimes there are books that come out and I read them and like I look and there's like hundreds of thousands of 5-star reviews and like literally like no one doesn't like it. There's like 2 1-star reviews. And I mean, I've got to start realizing that when like books are kind of hive mind 5 stars, that maybe it's just either people buying into hype or I don't even know. I just sometimes I think I'm like, there's this like massive social experiment where everyone's raving about a book and then I'm either getting a different version or like it's just to mess with me. And I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm an alien brought to the planet to like see if I can make sense of human behavior. And then I get books and I go, I don't understand. What did you like about this? Like, honestly, I felt like if you were to explain to someone who lived in like a cave, like what a book was, and you explained it to them conceptually, and then ask them to create a book based on like your definition of a book and description of a book, this is the draft of what a person would have come up with versus an actual novel. Like, the writing was a mess. The plot holes were just endless. There is so much going back and forth in timelines, but it didn't even need to be. It didn't make any sense. But I think the worst part about this book is the main character is so unlikable, but not in a fun way. She's just so judgmental. And like the internalized misogyny here of like literally just criticizing every woman she meets, it was so unbearable. And then she's in love with this guy, and I don't know why she's in love with him. He seems like an abusive asshat, but like, I don't know. I guess he's hot. Like, it just, and then they're randomly like, they're like having sex, and I was like, I don't even understand why there's a relationship with these people. And I honestly, I don't know. I'm starting to feel like the world is messing with me, or I'm like on the wrong planet or something, because books come out, everyone loves them, I read them, and I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand. And this is one of them. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe a lot of people like read while doing 15 other things or listening to like audiobooks while like they're working or something. And so they're only like half engaged in the story. And so they don't pay that much attention. And so it seems like quick and fun pace, like quick pace and fun and fast. And I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. But like, I don't listen to audiobooks, and I sit and like read the book, and like, I don't do anything else when I'm reading. And so I get very frustrated because I read this and I'm just like, I don't understand. But so I don't know. This is so disappointing. And I don't know, like, I mean, and if you liked it, I'm not trying to like judge you for liking it. Like, I'm just glad people read. So like, I try really hard not to be like, hey, this book sucks, or I don't like this book. Because like, there's a lot of things that are popular I don't like. But then like every so often, it's just, sometimes like I just can't wrap my head around why certain books are so popular. And I mean, I guess that's why, like, my writing isn't, because I don't understand. I don't know. Maybe I don't understand how people think. Maybe I'm broken. I don't know. But yeah, this was very disappointing. So anyway, that's what I've read so far this month, and this ended up being super long anyway. So good thing I did this one. So I will be back with some more in either like a week or so, or at the end of the month, depending on how fast the rest of the stuff I read goes. All right. So let me know if you've read any of these, or if you're looking to read any of these, or your thoughts on them. And maybe you liked First Lie Wins. And if you did, I mean, like I said, I'm not judging you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And like, I wish I had. So, you know, I think I'm broken. Like I said, it's probably just me. But anyway, I'll be back soon. All right. Bye.